So I got a DSI off eBay, and unbeknownst to me, the left and right shoulder buttons did not function properly. They didn't work at all at first, and then I looked around and discovered the blowing technique, which got them to work a little bit, but never consistently. And this was very frustrating, so I fixed it myself, and I'm going to show you how. Basically, all you need is some rubbing alcohol. I guess anything over 90% will do. So let's flip this over, and let's take off the battery cover here with this screw and this screw. Okay, we got there's going to be actually 7 screws you'll have to remove. It's pretty self-explanatory. You'll see the screws. These 2 little screws aren't screws really, they're adjustment points for the 2 screens. That's a whole other subject, and you can look that up on YouTube. So I've already taken them out. Also, before you do this, make sure you take out your stylus and any game you might have, and memory card if you have a memory card. So take all that out. What you'll need to do is, gently work around and use a little pressure to try and pry it off. Try to pry the halves apart, and eventually it'll give, and you'll be able to open it up and expose the interior. And what will happen is this connector here will pop off, and it goes over here. That's for your one of your video screens. So remember that when you're reassembling it. Now let's get a look at the button assembly. Alright, so here's the inner part with the button assembly. As you can see, the button is actually inside of this black housing, and there's one over here as well. That's where the actual button is. So we're going to remove these 2 screws here, and by the way, when you're doing this, you should do one side at a time and then reassemble it before you move on to the other side, because there's some parts that you might get switched, and it just would be a headache, and it's easier to use as reference if you just do one at a time. So we'll take this off here. Alright, with the black housing removed, you can actually see the button attached to the board here, and it's got this very thin ribbon cable, and it would be extremely difficult to try and solder a replacement button on. So luckily we don't need to do that. Also, the button assembly is consisting of 3 parts: the plastic button, a spring, and a pivot, a little pivot piece of metal here. As you can see, when you take them out, they kind of get separated, and it's obnoxious. But as you can see, there's a hole there. That's where the little metal piece goes, where this pivots on, and the spring goes. When you put it back together, the spring goes over this circle part here on the underside, and when you put it back together, you'll figure it out. That's also the reason why you want to do just one side at a time. Also, this little nut might come out, and that just goes right over here. It's actually one of the parts for the battery panel. See how that goes? So when you reassemble it, obviously this little part will go in here, and that'll go in here, see how that works? Alright, now the way you clean this button, this actually worked for me. You're going to get some rubbing alcohol. This is 91%. Nothing fancy about it. What you'll do is unscrew the cap, pour some in. Alright, so with some alcohol poured into the cap here, and your button on an angle, you're going to want to submerge it into the alcohol. So we're going to do an alcohol bath on the button, making sure that it gets into all the little crevices and works its way in there. You want to be you want to be conscious about not getting any alcohol in the two adjustment screws there for the screens. It probably wouldn't be the end of the world if you did, but you know, that's obviously you're going to want to have a napkin handy to help you out in case you get into a situation. So with the button submerged with the alcohol, I would just let it sit for like 10 minutes and then blow it out and submerge it again. And I'd repeat this at least 2 times. The first time I did this, I reassembled it. I did both buttons, and I found I had about 90% function restored, which was pretty good, but I wanted more than that, so I took it apart and did it again, and now I have 100% function, and that's great. No more blowing, no more, thinking maybe they'll work, maybe they won't. This has been a 100% cure for me. Now we can go over, let me show you how to disassemble the unit so you can get to the other button, because it's a little different than the other side. Alright, the left button is reassembled. Now let's go over to the right button. It's a little different. As you can see, it's somewhat attached to the memory card housing and the stylus holder. You need to remove these screws and these 2 screws. So let's do that. Alright, now with the screws removed, we can lift out the yellow assembly here. Everything might just pop out altogether, as it sort of just did. That comes out, put that aside, take off the black part here. Now here's the memory card holder, still attached to the ribbon, so be careful of that. When you take it apart, this might pop out, this metal shielding here, but you'll notice that right here there's a little cavity, and it fits perfectly into this little assembly. There's a pattern there, so you can use that to guide you in reassembly. And you'll notice that you've got the same button layout, the spring, the pivot, the same 3-piece assembly. But on this half, the button is actually attached to the memory card assembly. So you just want to repeat the whole alcohol dipping process. Submerging it, letting it sit, blow it out, repeat, and then reassemble. But be mindful that this yellow part goes on before the black part here. Alright, so with the DSI reassembled, the best way to test your buttons to see what improvements you made is to go into the sound player and just mess around with the left and right sound buttons. You can assign different sounds to them, and let's see how good this works. Keep in mind, this didn't work at all when I first got it in the mail. So as you can see, I basically have 100% function, and this is great. No more blowing, no more, worrying. This worked for me. It can work for you. I'm sure it can work on a DS, a DSI, obviously a DS LITE, and maybe a 3DS. I don't know about their button layout. Just take it slow and follow my directions. Obviously, anything you do is at your own risk, but this worked.